The air in the ballroom smelled like gardenias and anxiety, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. I stood in the receiving line, third from the end, flanked by my cousin Derek, who kept glancing at his phone, and my Aunt Carol, who'd already taken 2 sips of champagne before the first guest even arrived. My dress was simple, ivory silk, knee-length, sleeves tapered to a single mother-of-pearl button at each cuff. Not bridal, not flashy. Intentional. I'd chosen it the same way I'd chosen everything else that day, with quiet certainty. I adjusted the strap of my clutch, no bouquet, no veil, no hand to hold, and felt the weight of dozens of eyes slide over me, then linger just a beat too long. A murmur started near the floral arch. Is she alone? Then louder from behind me, Derek's stage whisper, pitched just low enough to sound confidential but loud enough to carry. Did she forget the RSVP said and guessed, or did no one want to come with her? A ripple of laughter followed. Polite, cruel, familiar. I didn't flinch, didn't turn. Didn't even let my smile falter, not the soft, closed-lip one I'd practiced in the mirror that morning, the one that said I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. Because I was. They saw Maya Lynn, 34, adjunct lecturer, lives in the converted carriage house behind Mom's place, still single. They didn't see the email chain open on my phone's lock screen. Subject, final protocol, Vesper attendance, confidential. They didn't know that at 8:42 p.m. a black electric sedan would pull into the circular drive, its license plate registered to a Delaware LLC no Google search would decode. They didn't know that the man stepping out, tall, silver threading his temples, wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit with no visible logos, was Daniel Vesper, interim CEO of Vesper Holdings. Net worth, $3.8 billion according to Forbes, though insiders said it was higher. And as of last Thursday, my fiancé. Protocol had been explicit, separate entrances, no prior acknowledgement. He arrives at 8:47 p.m. precisely. You do not greet him. You do not look surprised. You wait for him to initiate. Security had briefed me twice. His chief of staff had called personally. This isn't about optics, Dr. Lin, it's about precedent. When he walks in alone, it signals intention. When he walks to you, that signals truth. So I stood, still, grounded, as another cluster of guests approached. My sister's in-laws, all smiles and air kisses. I extended my hand, introduced myself by first and last name, accepted their perfunctory congratulations with grace, and let their eyes flick past me, searching for someone more relevant. Then 8:46 p.m. A hush began at the far end of the ballroom. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a ripple, like wind moving through tall grass. Conversations stuttered mid-sentence. A champagne flute paused halfway to a lip. The string quartet faltered on a note, then recovered. I didn't turn. I felt it first, the shift in air pressure, the collective intake of breath, the way the light seemed to dim, then focus, as if the chandeliers had subtly tilted toward the doors. Then the double oak doors, carved with ivy and doves, swung inward, silent on hydraulic hinges. And he walked in. Not with fanfare, not with an entourage, just Daniel, alone, hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed, but eyes scanning not the room, me. The laughter from moments before died completely. My cousin's smirk froze, then crumpled into confusion. Aunt Carol set her glass down so hard a drop sloshed over the rim. Daniel didn't head for the bar, the head table, or the groom. He moved with unhurried certainty down the center aisle, past the floral arrangements, past the cake table with its 5 tiers of vanilla bean and raspberry, past my sister, who was now gripping her husband's arm like a lifeline, until he reached the receiving line. He stopped directly in front of me. For 3 full seconds he just looked at me, not with pity, not with performance, with recognition. As if in a room of 200 people I was the only fixed point in his orbit. Then, very deliberately, he reached into his jacket, not for a phone, not for a checkbook, but for a single white gardenia, stem wrapped in black velvet ribbon. He offered it to me. And only then did he speak, quietly so only I could hear, though every ear in the room strained to catch it. You look like you always do, Maya. Like you built this moment yourself, and left the door open for me to walk through. My fingers closed around the stem, cool, fragrant, real. Behind me Derek whispered, voice cracked with disbelief, Who is that? But I didn't answer. Because in that second I understood the deeper truth, the one my grandmother had tried to teach me years ago, fingers gidding mine over needle and thread. Laughter only lands if you let it unbutton you. And I was already fastened. I didn't sit down right away. Even after the receiving line finally dissolved and guests drifted toward the open bar, still glancing, still whispering, I lingered near the edge of the dance floor, feigning interest in the floral centerpieces. Peonies, ranunculus, eucalyptus, arranged in low, asymmetrical clusters. Beautiful, expensive. My sister's aesthetic, lush, abundant, designed to be photographed from every angle, just like the wedding itself. Every detail curated for the highlight reel, the candid tears, the twirling bride, the champagne spray at midnight. And me, I was the quiet figure in the background, slightly out of frame, hands folded, smile serene. The aunt in the black and white photo no one could quite place. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket, navy wool, unlined, lightweight for June, and felt the subtle ridge of my phone tucked into the inner pocket. Not just a phone, a vault. I waited until the first string of toasts began, my father, voice thick with pride, recounting how my sister had planned this day down to the napkin fold. And then, with deliberate slowness, I slipped away. Not dramatically. Just a step back, then another, until I was in the dim hallway outside the restrooms, where the music softened to a pulse, and the air smelled faintly of lemongrass cleaner and old wood. I leaned against the wall, cool plaster pressing into my shoulder blades, and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, not with notifications, but with a single open document, Vesper Collection Final Terms Confidential Draft 7. Below it, an email thread unread from the university's Office of Sponsored Research. Subject, urgent, chair negotiation timeline adjustment. I scrolled. My name appeared 8 times, not as Dr. Lin, curator. Not as Maya Lin, please confirm availability. As lead negotiator, primary signatory, final authority on disbursement criteria. They saw me taking notes at family dinners. Oh, Maya's just jotting down recipes. But those weren't recipes, they were clauses. Clause 4.2, all acquisitions require dual approval, 1 academic. 1 ethical review board. Clause 7.1, no donor retains curatorial influence post-donation. I'd spent 3 months negotiating those lines, pushing back against lawyers who called me overly cautious, until Daniel himself had intervened. She's not cautious, she's precise, and precision is the only currency I trust. A laugh floated down the hall, hi, bright, my sister. Followed by the clink of glass, I closed my eyes. The contrast was almost dizzying. Inside that ballroom I was the quiet one, the academic cousin, the safe placeholder in the 3rd row. Out here in the quiet hum of the hallway, I was the woman who had just secured $4.2 million in funding to digitize and preserve the Codex Sinaiticus fragments. Fragments that had been languishing in a climate-controlled vault for decades, inaccessible to all but a handful of scholars. My proposal, my timeline, my insistence on open access licensing that would let a student in Nairobi study the same parchment as a professor at Oxford. I lifted the phone slightly, angling it toward my face, not for a selfie but to catch my reflection in the dark screen. Same dark hair pinned back in a low chignon, same pearl studs, my grandmother's, same calm expression, but behind it a current, not anger, not even vindication. Clarity, the kind that comes when you've spent years being misread and finally the text aligns with the subtext. I tapped the camera icon, not to record the hallway, to face the lens. The red light blinked on, tiny, discreet. And I spoke, voice low but steady, no tremor, no performative sigh. Just truth, offered like a hand extending across the screen. Have you ever been introduced as just something while holding the keys to the whole vault? A pause, the music swelled behind me, violin soaring into the chorus of some romantic ballad. Just Maya, just the teacher, just here for the food. They don't see the contracts signed in triplicate. The 3 a.m. calls with conservators in Berlin. The way you learn to hold your breath during negotiations, not because you're nervous, but because you've trained yourself to speak only when your words are irrevocable. I glanced toward the ballroom doors, where a sliver of light cut across the floor. They think silence means you have nothing to say, but sometimes, silence is the space you leave for the truth to echo. Then softer, almost a secret. If this resonates, tap the necktie, not for me. For the next time you walk into a room, alone, underestimated, and know deep in your bones that your worth doesn't need a guest beside you to be real. I stopped recording, didn't post it, not yet, just saved it to drafts labeled buttoned. Because the night wasn't over. And the most powerful truths. They don't go viral in the hallway. They go nuclear on the dance floor. But first I had to return to my seat, 3rd row, miscellaneous relatives. right between Uncle Frank, who still thought NFTs were a breakfast cereal, and Cousin Lena, who'd already asked me twice if I was seeing anyone interesting. I took a breath, straightened my lapel, and fastened the top button of my jacket, click, the one that had come loose in the car. Dignity isn't worn. It's secured. One button at a time. 2 weeks before the wedding, I stood in the hushed, golden light of Madame Elise's atelier, a narrow storefront tucked between a vintage bookstore and a tea shop downtown, its windows fogged with decades of steam from the pressing irons. Inside, it smelled of beeswax, lavender sachets, and the faint, clean tang of silk sizing. No fluorescent lights. Just brass sconces casting warm halos over dress forms draped in ivory, champagne, blush, ghosts of other women's vows. Madame Elise herself, tiny silver-haired with hands like bird bones and eyes that missed nothing, circled me slowly, pins held between her lips, a measuring tape draped over one shoulder like a stole. I stood on the low wooden platform barefoot in the ivory silk sheath she designed from a sketch I'd sent. No train, no beading, no illusion neckline. Just clean lines, a seam that fell precisely at the narrowest part of the waist, a back that dipped just enough to suggest elegance without spectacle. It was the kind of dress a woman wore when she wasn't trying to become someone else for a day, when she was already, irrevocably, herself. "You move like you carry something heavy," she murmured, not unkindly, her French accent softening the edges of the words. "Not in your arms, here." She tapped her own sternum just above her heart. I didn't answer, there wasn't much to say. The weight wasn't grief, not exactly. Grandma Chen had passed quietly in her sleep 6 weeks prior, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and the low murmur of her favorite Mahler symphony. It was peace, not pain, that lingered, but her absence, that had its own gravity. A quiet orbit I was still learning to navigate. Madame Elise stepped closer, her fingers brushing the cuff of my right sleeve, where a single mother-of-pearl button hung slightly askew, its thread frayed at the edge. She frowned. "A loose button," she said, plucking it gently between thumb and forefinger, "means you're rushing or distracted, or both." She turned, opened a small lacquered box on her work table, its surface worn smooth from use, and selected a new spool of silk thread, the colour an exact match to the dress. Ivory, not white, white shouts, ivory listens. Then, with a needle already threaded, how she'd done it so fast I'd never know, she began to resew the button. Not quickly, not impatiently. Slowly. Each stitch deliberate. In-out loop, pull tight but not straining, secure but not rigid. "My mother taught me this," she said, her voice low, rhythmic with the motion of her hands. "In Shanghai 1948, bombs falling outside, and she sat at the table mending my school uniform. When the world unravels," she said, "you do not stop, you rebutton, you do it slowly. You do it with your full attention, because dignity isn't worn like a coat you can take off. It's stitched into you, and if one button comes loose, you don't hide it. You fix it right there in the middle of the storm." I watched her fingers, wrinkled, steady, impossibly precise. The needle flashed like a tiny silver fish in the lamplight. "A loose button," she repeated, snipping the thread with a small gold scissors, "is not a flaw. It is a reminder that something needs tending, that you are still becoming." She stepped back, tilted her head and smiled, a small knowing thing. "There's, now it will hold." I raised my arm, turned my wrist. The button sat perfectly centered, snug against the cuff, catching the light like a tiny moon. That evening, after I'd paid and thanked her, after I'd carefully folded the dress into its garment bag lined with tissue paper, Grandma's old wooden jewelry box waited on my kitchen table. Not the ornate one she kept on her dresser. The plain one, the working one. Walnut. Slightly warped from humidity, its brass latch worn smooth by decades of use. Inside, nestled beside her reading glasses and a dried sprig of lavender, lay a single pearl stud, its twin long lost, and a folded square of cream stationery sealed with a wax stamp, the Chinese character for truth. I broke the seal. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, angular, the pen slightly pressed into the paper where her arthritis had flared. "Maya, if they laugh when you walk in alone, don't untie, don't explain, don't shrink. Rebutton. Fasten yourself back together, stitch by stitch, right there in front of them. They mistake silence for emptiness, but you know better. You carry the archive, the quiet ones always do." Znai. I traced the characters with my thumb, felt the slight ridge where the ink had pooled. And then I did what she taught me, what Madame Elise had echoed. I went to my closet, took out the dress, and just to be sure, I checked every single button. Front cuffs, back neckline. All secure. But I left the loose one in my pocket. Not as a flaw. As a talisman. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of defiance isn't a grand gesture. It's the quiet, deliberate decision to hold yourself together, while the world waits for you to fall apart. And when the doors swing open later tonight, I won't be holding my breath. I'll be holding the thread. Ready to rebutton, should the moment require it. Family trees, they say, are living things, branches reaching, roots deepening, seasons of bloom and fall. Ours was more like a corporate org chart, rigid, hierarchical, annotated with unspoken asterisks. At the top, Grandpa Chen, retired judge, quiet authority radiating like a steady frequency only certain people could tune into. Then my parents, Mom, the diplomat, fluent in 6 languages, and the subtle art of diffusing tension with a perfectly timed tray of almond cookies. Dad, the engineer who believed every problem had a solution if you just applied enough logic and coffee. Beneath them, the branches split. My sister Evelyn, the star, radiant, magnetic, the one who'd married into the Sterling family. Yes, those Sterlings, old Portland money, vineyards in Willamette, a summer house in Cannon Beach that looked like it belonged in a Ralph Lauren catalogue. And then me, Maya, the scholar, the quiet one, the footnote in the family narrative, and Maya, she teaches art history. Very thoughtful. Thoughtful, that was the word they used when they didn't know what else to say. Thoughtful like a decorative pillow, pleasant, harmless, uncomplicated. What they didn't see was the scaffolding behind the quiet. They saw me at the rehearsal dinner, refilling Aunt Dory's water glass just before it ran dry, adjusting the crooked place card for the groom's second cousin, discreetly intercepting the waiter before he spilled Merlot on the ivory linen runner. They called it helpful. What it was management. The kind honed over years of steering faculty senate meetings, negotiating fragile loan agreements with European museums, mediating between donors who wanted their name in gold leaf and conservators who insisted on archival neutrality. I didn't do chaos, I structured it. And in a family where emotion often ran like an unregulated river, my calm wasn't passivity, it was containment. A dam built of patience, precision, and the quiet certainty that if you let the flood come, someone would drown. Evelyn's wedding wasn't just an event, it was a production. 6 months of spreadsheets, vendor calls, site visits, mood boards pinned to a shared Google Drive titled Evelyn's Perfect Day Ring Sparkles, to which I of course had view-only access. My official title, Logistics Support, unofficial, Crisis Mitigation Specialist. When the florist double-booked and threatened to cancel, I found a replacement within 2 hours, not by pleading but by offering a cross-promotion with the university's botanical garden exhibit. When the string quartet's cellist fell ill, I called a former student, now principal cellist at the Oregon Symphony, who agreed to sub for double the fee, paid discreetly from my own emergency fund. I never told Evelyn. Some debts are better left unspoken. When Aunt Dory's, bless her, got into a heated debate with the groom's uncle about property tax reform and nearly upended the cake table, it was my hand on her elbow, my low voice murmuring, "Dory's, the Pinot Noir is exceptional tonight. Shall we compare notes?" That steered her gently away. They mistook competence for compliance. They saw me taking notes, Myers got it all written down, and assumed I was just recording. What I was doing was archiving. Every promise, every deviation from the original contract, every offhand comment that might later become a misunderstanding. In the margins of my moleskine, leather-bound, navy edges worn soft with use, I'd scribbled things like Sterling SR to caterer, just charge it to the house account, Evelyn's name is fine. Not legally binding, but noted. Or groom's mother whispering to Evelyn, "Darling, maybe don't seat Maya next to the alumni donors. She's lovely, but you know." I did know, and I'd requested politely via email the 3rd row. Power in our family wasn't seized, it was ceded, by silence, by deference, by the unspoken agreement that some voices carried more weight because they were louder, shinier, more visible. Evelyn didn't take the spotlight, she simply assumed it was hers like the ocean assumes the shore. And I stood just outside the tide line, watching, learning, waiting. Was at stake tonight wasn't just pride, or even the $22 million endowed chair in ethical stewardship I'd been negotiating for the past year, the one that would finally give the university's rare manuscripts program real autonomy, real resources, a permanent home. That chair wasn't just a title. It was a platform. A chance to redefine how institutions handled donor influence, provenance ethics, cultural repatriation. And it hinged, delicately, critically, on perception. On the university board's confidence that I wasn't just a scholar but a strategist, that I had access, not just to ideas but to influence. They didn't know about the late-night calls with Daniel, dissecting the fine print of the Vesper Foundation's bylaws. They didn't know I'd declined a competing offer from a rival institution, triple the salary, because their terms allowed donors veto power over acquisitions. They didn't know that the final clause in our agreement, the one guaranteeing an independent ethics review panel with binding authority, had been my addition, fought for over 3 weeks of tense Zoom calls. No, to them I was still the girl who corrected the spelling of Renaissance on the high school yearbook staff and got called pedantic. The one who chose grad school over law, wasting her LSAT scores. The quiet sister who must be lonely because who chooses solitude unless they're chosen against. Then at the rehearsal dinner, a candlelit affair in the Sterling garden, fairy lights tangled in the wisteria, Aunt Lydia found me near the herb border pretending to admire the rosemary. She was 92, moved with a cane now, but her spine was still straight as a ruler, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't ask how I was holding up. She simply stood beside me, the scent of time rising between us, and said, her voice low, dry as parchment, "He's coming, isn't he?" I froze, my fingers, which had been idly plucking a leaf, stilled. "Who?" I asked too casually. She turned her head just slightly, not a smile, a knowing. The man whose initials matched the confidentiality addendum on the Vesper collection press release. The one whose emergency contact field was updated before the ink dried on the MOU. My breath caught. How? The press release had gone out only to accredited media. The addendum was buried in Appendix B, accessible only via a secure portal. The emergency contact change, filed electronically, time-stamped but not public record. "You read the board minutes," I said, not a question. "I read everything," she corrected, tapping her temple. "Especially the footnotes, especially the silences." She paused, watching a firefly blink in the dusk. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had the steadiness of stone and the timing of a metronome." Then she leaned in. Her whisper barely audible over the clink of silverware and the distant laughter from the patio. "When they laugh tonight, remember, the quiet ones don't need to shout to be heard, we just need the right acoustics." She patted my arm, once firm, and walked away, leaving me standing in the fragrant dark, heart pounding not with fear, but with the sudden, electric certainty of being seen. Not as the footnote. As the footnote that mattered. And somewhere, deep in my clutch, the loose button felt heavier than ever. Because Aunt Lydia hadn't just known. She'd been waiting. And if she knew, who else was listening? Aunt Lydia didn't live in a house, she lived in a sanctum. Her condo sat on the top floor of a century-old brick building downtown, its windows tall and narrow, overlooking a quiet park where cherry blossoms fell like pink snow in April and students from the law school argued Socratic dialogues on the benches below. The elevator opened directly into her foyer, no hallway, no shared space. Just dark oak floors, a single shaker bench, and the faint scent of aged paper, bergamot and beeswax. I'd visited her the Tuesday before the wedding, not for comfort, though I needed it, but for clarity. The family group chat had exploded that morning with a final seating chart that moved me from row 3, seat 4 to row 6, seat 9, wedged between the groom's college roommate, a tech bro who once asked if the Mona Lisa was photoshopped, and a distant cousin who'd spent Thanksgiving debating whether libraries were obsolete. It was the last straw in a week of subtle, cumulative erasures. I arrived at 10 a.m. bearing a pot of jasmine tea and a box of almond cookies, Mom's recipe, the one that always softened edges. Aunt Lydia answered the door in a crisp linen blouse and slacks, her silver hair coiled in a low knot, reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She didn't hug me, didn't offer condolences. She simply stepped aside and said, "The kettle, on, and the good cups are in the left cabinet." Inside, the space was spare, almost monastic, but alive with quiet intelligence. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, organized not by genre but by era of legal precedent, pre-1954 Warren Court post-Bork digital age. A drafting table held a single document under a weighted glass, a land deed, handwritten in cursive, dated 1889. On the coffee table, a legal pad open to a page covered in her meticulous shorthand, and a fountain pen, ink still damp. She poured the tea, no sugar, no lemon, and handed me a cup. We sat in silence for a full minute, steam curling between us like unspoken thoughts. Then, without looking up, she said, "They're treating you like a placeholder, as if your presence is decorative, not deliberate." It wasn't a question, it was a finding. I exhaled, the sound louder than I intended. "They think because I'm not fighting for center stage, I don't want a seat at all." "Fighting is inefficient," she replied, finally meeting my eyes. Hers were pale grey, the colour of storm clouds just before rain, calm but charged with potential. "Precision is power, and you, Maya, have always had a gift for precision." She set her cup down, turned the legal pad toward me. At the top, in her neat script, Maya Lin, Vesper Holdings, sequence of events. Beneath it, a timeline. March 12, press release issued. University of Portland partners with Vesper Holdings on Rare Manuscripts Initiative. March 13, Board Special Meeting Minutes, Appendix B, Confidentiality Addendum, Sec 4.1. Lead Negotiator, Dr. Maya Lin, UP. Counterparty, DV. April 2, Vesper Foundation Bylaws amended, Article VII, Sec 3. Emergency Contact and Medical Proxy Designation, per ORS 127.515, updated to Maya Lin, PhD. Filed, April 2, 10:17 a.m. May 28, Domestic Partnership Agreement Amendment 3 filed with Multnomah County Clerk. Witnessed J. Reed-esque, notarized M. Tors. My breath left me in a slow, steady stream. I hadn't told her not one word. Yet here it was, every key date, every legal touchpoint, laid out with the clarity of a trial exhibit. How? The press release was public, the board minutes, archived but accessible with a faculty ID and a polite email to the clerk, the bylaws amendment, filed with the Secretary of State, standard procedure for any change in corporate governance involving fiduciary duty, and the domestic partnership, she gave the faintest shrug. I know Marisol Tors, she notarizes my will updates. She mentioned a rather elegant amendment last week. I asked for the case number, verified it myself. She reached into the drawer of the coffee table and slid a cream-coloured envelope across the surface. It bore no address, just my name, handwritten in her precise hand. "Open it," she said, "if they laugh too loud." I didn't open it then. I traced the seal, a wax impression of the Oregon State seal, its motto clear even in miniature, Alis volat propriis. She flies with her own wings. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice thick. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Because in 1978 I drafted the first version of Oregon Revised Statute 108.04, the Spousal Privilege Statute, not because I believed in marriage as an institution, because I believed in protection. In the right of two people to hold a truth between them that the world isn't entitled to pry open." Her gaze sharpened. "You and Daniel have chosen your truth, guarded it, honored it. That deserves more than silence, it deserves documentation." Then softer, "Your grandmother and I used to say, the law is only as strong as the paper it's written on, and the people who know where to file it. I filed this." She tapped the envelope. "It's a notarized affidavit, dated yesterday. Sworn statement confirming my awareness of your relationship, your role in the Vesper negotiations, and my intent to revise my own revocable trust, pending public acknowledgement, to name you as sole executor and primary beneficiary of my scholarly archives and residual estate." She paused. "It's not about the money, Maya, it's about precedence. When they see my signature on that page, when they see the county stamp, the notary seal, they won't be laughing at the quiet woman in the third row. They'll be wondering what else she's been filing while they weren't looking." I held the envelope. It felt lighter than paper, it felt like armor. "What if they call it a bluff?" Aunt Lydia smiled, just the corners of her mouth lifting, a flash of steel beneath the gentleness. "Then hand them the certified copy, and say, the courthouse is open until 4:30. She stood, signaling the visit was over. At the door she placed a hand on my arm, not frail but firm. "You were never the backup, Maya, you were the contingency plan they didn't know they needed. And tonight, when the doors open, don't just walk in. Walk in like the affidavit is already stamped. Like the deed is already recorded. Like the truth is already filed." I stepped into the hallway, the envelope warm in my hands. Behind me the door closed, soft, final. And in that moment I understood, elder ally validation wasn't about being believed. It was about being certified. Stamped, notarized, ready for the record. The loose button in my pocket. I'd be resewing it tonight. With Aunt Lydia's thread. In, the needle pierced the silk clean and quiet. Out, the thread pulled taut, no slack. Loop around the button stem precise. Pull firm but not tight enough to pucker the fabric. Each stitch was a sentence. Each knot a period. I didn't look up, didn't flinch when someone nearby, Cousin Lena maybe, whispered, "Is she fixing her dress? Now, let them watch, let them wonder." This wasn't a repair, it was a declaration. A quiet, tactile assertion. I am not unraveling, I am reinforcing. Because the real proof, the foundation, wasn't in my hands. It was 12 miles away. In the basement of the Multnomah County Courthouse. Where at 10:17 a.m. on April 2nd, a clerk had stamped and filed Amendment 3 to the Domestic Partnership Agreement of Daniel Everett Vesper and Maya Lynn. A document that named me not just as partner, but as primary emergency contact, medical proxy, and signatory authority for all matters pertaining to personal archives and intellectual property. A document that, per Oregon law, carried the same legal weight as a marriage license. A document that, once filed, became public record. Accessible. Verifiable. Unchangeable. Uncle Richard finally finished his toast to thunderous applause, glasses raised, smiles wide. The string quartet swelled into the next song. I tied off the final knot, snipped the thread with the tiny gold scissors from my clutch and smoothed the cuff. The button sat perfectly centered. Secure. Ready. And just as the last note faded, the double doors at the far end of the ballroom chimed, soft, electronic, like a bank vault sensing motion. My fingers didn't tremble. My breath didn't catch. Because I knew what was coming. Not hope. Not luck. Protocol. And somewhere in a courthouse basement, a clerk's stamp waited, patient, permanent, like a signature on the truth. The cake was a masterpiece. 5 tiers of ivory fondant, hand-painted with delicate gold vines, sugar peonies cascading down one side like a slow-motion avalanche of luxury. Evelyn and James stood before it, laughing, shoulders touching, the serrated knife gleaming between them as they made the first cut, a perfect synchronized motion, captured from 3 angles by the videographer circling like a hawk. Applause, flashbulbs, the quintessential wedding moment polished to a high gloss. I stood back near the edge of the cake table sipping sparkling water with a twist of lime. No alcohol, not tonight. Clarity was currency, and I couldn't afford to be even a fraction off balance. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a soft, insistent pulse against my thigh. I didn't check it, not yet, not here. But then Evelyn turned, the knife still in hand, frosting smudged on her wrist, and her eyes found mine across the room. She smiled, bright, practiced, the smile she used for donors and distant relatives, and began walking toward me, James trailing slightly behind, already reaching for a napkin to wipe his hands. "There you are," she said, voice warm, but her eyes flickered past my shoulder, scanning for witnesses, audience control, I noted reflexively. "She's staging this." She stopped just inside my personal space, close enough for intimacy, far enough to retreat if needed. Her grip on the knife tightened, knuckles whitening. "You really came alone?" she asked, lowering her voice, though not enough to be private. "Mom's mortified. She kept asking if you'd forgotten to RSVP and guest." Or, a pause, a tilt of her head, feigned concern softening the edge, if something happened. The implication hung there, sweet and poisonous. Were you stood up? Were you not worth bringing? I met her gaze, didn't smile, didn't frown, just held it, steady, neutral, the way I held a fragile manuscript, with respect but no reverence. "I came exactly as I intended to, Evelyn." She opened her mouth, perhaps to press, perhaps to pivot, but that's when my phone buzzed again. Longer this time, insistent. I excused myself with a nod, "Excuse me, one moment," and stepped toward the balcony doors, the cool night air a relief against my skin. Only then did I pull out the phone. 2 notifications. First, a text from University General Counsel, R. Hayes. "Maya, did you know Vesper's team just pulled their $5M pledge to Westlake College? Timing, conspicuous, call me." I read it twice. Westlake, our biggest rival, the school that had tried to poach Daniel 3 years ago and failed. Their humanities dean had publicly mocked our niche focus on ethical stewardship just last month, and now poof, $5 million gone, not reduced, pulled, full retraction, no press release. Just a terse email to Westlake's president, CCing their board, Per Section 4.3 of the MOU, misrepresentation of curatorial independence voids commitment. Effective immediately. Daniel hadn't told me, but he didn't have to. This wasn't retaliation, it was reinforcement. A quiet surgical correction, like excising a tumor no one else could see. Before I could process it, the second notification chimed. This one a voice memo from Dad. I tapped play, holding the phone close, the city lights glittering below like scattered sequins. His voice was low, strained, trying for casual and missing. Hey Maya, just wanted to check in. Your uncle, over here. He's well, he said a few, and he's holding court near the bar, said something about, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he told James's dad you were fishing for investors tonight. Said it was kind of bold, walking in solo like that, almost like a strategy. A pause, the clink of ice in a glass. I shut it down, told him that was enough. But sweetheart, be careful, okay? Some people do like it when the quiet ones start making noise. I ended the call, didn't reply, didn't need to. Because in that moment the two pressures converged, not like waves, but like tectonic plates grinding deep underground, building pressure no one on the surface could yet feel. The external, the university's trust in me, already fragile, already questioned by board members who preferred seasoned, male leadership, now potentially undermined by the optics of tonight. If they think I'm using a personal relationship for professional gain. The internal, the family's narrative tightening around me, recasting my autonomy as desperation, my silence as scheming. I leaned against the railing, the wrought iron cool through the silk of my sleeve. Inside, the music swelled, a slow, sentimental ballad. Laughter rose and fell, glasses clinked. They thought they were isolating me. What they didn't realize was that isolation was where I did my best work. Where I drafted clauses. Where I memorized statutes. Where I filed things. I opened my notes app, typed 3 words. Marriage license registry. Then beneath it. Amendment 3 DP agreement, filed April 2. Emergency contact update, filed April 2. Trust revision, Aunt Lydia, notarized June 11. Receipts weren't just proof. They were leverage. And leverage wasn't about force. It was about fulcrum. Finding the exact point where a small, precise action could shift an entire system. I took a slow breath, deep, centering, and fastened the top button of my jacket. Click. The loose button on my cuff was now secure. But something else had come undone. The illusion that I needed their approval to exist in full color. I turned back toward the ballroom doors. The music was shifting, upbeat now, the DJ cueing the first real dance. Inside, my uncle's voice carried over the crowd, loud, jovial, cutting through the strings. And I said, Richard, if she's got a billionaire in her back pocket, why's she still teaching undergrads? Laughter, genuine, unguarded, cruel. I didn't flinch. I just smoothed my lapel, stepped back into the light and walked, not toward the dance floor, not toward my family, but toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. And beyond it, the service elevator. Because 12 miles away, the courthouse kiosk was still open until 9 p.m. And receipt 2 wasn't in my phone. It was in the county's database. Waiting to be printed. Certified. Filed, the service elevator smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Industrial, anonymous, the kind of space no one lingers in unless they have a reason. I pressed G for garage, my heels clicking against the scuffed linoleum, the only sound in the descending car. My reflection in the brushed steel doors was calm, hair still perfect, makeup intact, hands steady. But beneath the surface, my mind was already drafting the query. Multnomah County Clerk's Office, Online Records Portal, Domestic Partnership Filings, Vesper, Daniel E. and Lynn Meyer. I hadn't planned to retrieve it tonight, not like this. But the laughter, Uncle Richard's smirk, Evelyn's faux concern, the casual cruelty of fishing for investors, had shifted something. This wasn't about defending myself anymore. It was about documenting the record, because in any proceeding, legal, familial, institutional, the first party to produce certified evidence sets the frame. And I was done letting them frame me as the supplicant, the afterthought, the woman who hoped for validation. The elevator doors opened to the underground garage, dim, echoing, rows of SUVs and luxury sedans parked with suburban precision. I walked briskly to my car, a 10-year-old Volvo sedan, practical, unassuming, its trunk still holding the emergency kit I'd packed for Mom's chemo days. Water, protein bars, a blanket, a notepad, and a slim folder labelled just in case. Inside, copies of POA documents, hospital protocols, and, crucially, a printed map of downtown, highlighting 3 locations: the university legal office, the county courthouse, and Madame Elise's atelier. Some women carried lipstick for confidence. I carried contingency plans. I drove fast but smoothly, the city lights streaking past like comet tails. No sirens, no drama, just the hum of the engine and the quiet certainty that timing was everything. Daniel would arrive at 8:47. It was now 8:52. I had 13 minutes before the bouquet toss, 13 minutes to retrieve what the world refused to see. The Multnomah County Courthouse at night was a different creature. By day it bustled with lawyers in rumpled suits, plaintiffs clutching manila envelopes, jurors scrolling phones in hushed clusters. At night, it was all shadow and marble, the grand staircase lit by recessed LEDs, the bronze doors slightly ajar for the after-hours kiosk. A sleek, touchscreen terminal tucked into an alcove beside the security desk, staffed by a single deputy who barely glanced up as I approached. "Records retrieval," I said, voice low but clear. "Certified copies, domestic partnership amendment." He nodded, slid a laminated instruction card across the counter. Step 1. Visit www.mcculloch.org/records. Step 2. Enter case number or name. Step 3. Pay $8.50 per certified page, but I was already moving, fingers flying across the cool glass screen. No case number needed. Oregon's public records portal allowed name and date searches for filed domestic partnerships. I typed. Petitioner Vesper Daniel E. Respondent Lynn Meyer. Filing date range, April 13, 2025. Hit search. 1 result. In the matter of the amendment to domestic partnership agreement, Vesper, Daniel E. and Lynn, Meyer case number DP202504222. Filed April 2, 2025, 10:17 a.m. Recorded. Book 9873, page 214. Status, final certified copy available. My breath didn't catch, my hands didn't shake, this was expected, this was real. I selected print certified copy, inserted my credit card, and watched as the thermal printer whirred to life behind the glass partition. 1 page, then a second notary acknowledgement, Marisol Torres, Commission OR 7742. Then a third, witness signature, James Reed-esque. The deputy slid the packet across the counter, sealed in a crisp manila envelope stamped with the county seal. Certified true copy, Office of the County Clerk, MULTNOMAH County, Oregon. I thanked him, tucked the envelope into my clutch, right beside the needle and thread, and turned to leave. But I wasn't done. Because receipt 2 wasn't just the amendment. It was the context. I walked back to the kiosk, pulled up the Property and Trust Filings tab and entered Aunt Lydia's name. Chen Lydia W. Search. 1 result filed this morning at 11:03 a.m. Affidavit of intent to amend revocable trust. Chen Lydia W. Case number TR202508685. Filed June 17, 2025. Notarized. Marisol Torres. Summary. I, Lydia W. Chen, affirm my intent to revise Article IV of my revocable trust dated 1998 to name Meyer Lynn, Ph.D., as sole executor and primary beneficiary of my scholarly archives, personal library and residual estate, contingent upon public acknowledgement of her relationship with Daniel Vesper, CEO of Vesper Holdings, as documented in DP 202504422. Certified copy available. I printed it, paid, sealed it in a second envelope. Then ally actions. I stepped outside into the cool night air and dialed Aunt Lydia. She answered on the first ring. "You're at the courthouse," she said, not a question, a statement. "I have both," I replied, certified. A pause, then dry as parchment. "Good, now file the notice of claimed interest." Now, the kiosk does it. Section 5.2 of the portal. Family Trust Proceedings Notice of Contingent Interest. Cite both case numbers. Pay the $12 fee. It's not a claim, it's a reservation. A placeholder in the record, like putting a bookmark in a book someone's trying to burn. I went back inside, followed her instructions, typed the form, attached the case numbers. Uploaded scanned copies of both certified documents as exhibits, hit submit. The screen flashed, notice of claimed interest filed, case no. TR 20250685 notice 01, timestamp, 9:04 p.m. Receipt emailed. I walked back to my car, the 2 envelopes warm in my hands. Surface bureaucracy, a woman in an ivory dress. Retrieving paperwork at night. Substance, armor being forged in real time. Each stamp, each signature, each timestamp wasn't just proof, it was irreversibility. Once filed, these documents couldn't be unfiled. They lived in the system now. Permanent, searchable, citable. I started the car, checked the time, 9:08 p.m. The bouquet toss would be starting in 2 minutes. I pulled out of the garage, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. In my rearview mirror, the courthouse steps glowed under the street lamps, quiet, immutable, waiting. And in my clutch, the envelopes sat side by side. Not weapons, keys, to the record, to the truth, to the moment coming soon when the laughter would stop. Because receipts don't shout. They stamp. And once stamped, they echo forever. The toast was supposed to be charming. Uncle Richard, Evelyn's new father-in-law, retired corporate counsel, silver hair combed with military precision, had risen with his champagne flute, the crystal catching the chandelier light like a lens. He'd begun warmly, to Evelyn and James, 2 families, one beautiful future, applause, smiles. Then he leaned into the mic, voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, the kind meant to feel exclusive, intimate. And let's be honest, connections matter. Real ones, not just social media followers. A ripple of knowing laughter. Take Martin Shaw, former CFO of Vesper Holdings. Brilliant man, sat on our board for 8 years, taught me everything I know about leverage. He raised his glass higher. That's the kind of relationship that opens doors. The room swelled with approval, nods, murmurs, the clink of glasses. Evelyn beamed, James squeezed her hand. And I kept my expression serene, my posture relaxed, my hands folded in my lap, just as I'd been taught at every deposition prep, every high-stakes negotiation. Neutral mask, active listening, delay reaction. But beneath the table, my thumb slid across the screen of my phone, hidden in my lap, and opened my email. There it was, at the top of my inbox. Sent 2 hours ago. From Elena Cho, executive assistant to Daniel Vesper. Subject, final protocol, Vesper attendance, confidential. To Maya Lin M. Lin at Up Edu. Dr. Lin. Per our calls. White heavy check mark, Mr. Vesper, confirmed for Sterling Lin wedding. White heavy check mark, arrival. 8:47 p.m. sharp, security cleared via gate B. White heavy check mark, attire. Charcoal Tom Ford, no tie, no insignia. White heavy check mark, protocol. You do not acknowledge him until he initiates. White heavy check mark, security, briefing attached, see PDF. Reminder, Martin Shaw was terminated 11/15/2023 for breach of fiduciary duty, see internal memo 2023-1188. Public filing, SEC Form 8K, 11/16/2023. Do not engage if referenced. Truth requires no defense, only documentation. AC. I didn't need to open the attachment, I'd memorized it. Martin Shaw hadn't just stepped down. He'd been caught siphoning funds into a shell company in the Caymans, a scheme that collapsed when Daniel, newly interim CEO, ordered a forensic audit of all Q3 transactions. Shaw had sued for defamation. Lost, badly. The settlement included a non-disparagement clause but not a non-truth clause, and the SEC filing, public record, easily searchable, easily printable. Uncle Richard was still talking, now waxing poetic about legacy, but his words had receded into white noise. My focus narrowed to the timestamp at the top of the email, June 12, 2025, 8:03 a.m. sent while I was reviewing conservation reports. While Evelyn was texting me, can you grab extra napkins on your way? While the world assumed I was just there. This was receipt 1. Not a grand reveal, not a dramatic flourish. Just data, precise, time-stamped, unassailable. I exhaled slowly, evenly, through my nose the way Grandma taught me when anxiety threatened to tighten my throat. Breathe like you're threading a needle, she'd say. Slow, steady, one motion. And then I did it. Right there in the third row, under the glare of crystal and scrutiny, I reached for my cuff. The loose mother-of-pearl button, The one Madame Elise had warned me about, the one I'd carried as a talisman, was still there, dangling by two frayed threads. I took it between thumb and forefinger, felt the cool, smooth curve of it. Then, with deliberate, unhurried movements, I pulled the needle and ivory thread I'd slipped into my clutch that morning, not for show but for readiness, and began to re-sew it. The bouquet toss wasn't spontaneous. It was choreographed, a glittering crescendo of the evening's performance. Evelyn stood centre stage, back to the crowd of single women, and a few good-natured men dragged forward by their dates, the bouquet of peonies and ranunculus held high like a trophy. The DJ cued the music, upbeat, playful, single ladies remixed with strings, and the women laughed, jostled, raised their hands in mock competition, phones aloft to capture the moment. Flashbulbs popped, smiles wide. The illusion of joy, seamless and bright. I stood at the edge of the circle, not participating, not retreating, just present, like a footnote waiting for its moment to be read aloud. My clutch, heavier now with the 2 certified envelopes, rested against my thigh. The air smelled of perfume and champagne and the faint, warm sweetness of cake. Normal, festive, fragile. Then the music cut. Not with a record scratch, not with drama, just a clean digital click like a mic being muted. The lights didn't dim, the chandeliers still blazed, but the room shifted. A collective intake of breath, a ripple of confusion. Because Daniel was walking, not toward the stage, not toward Evelyn, but toward me. He moved with unhurried certainty, his charcoal suit absorbing the light, his expression calm, focused. No smile, no frown, just intent. Heads turned, whispers died. Even the DJ froze, finger hovering over the next track. He stopped 3 feet away. Didn't take my hand. Didn't pull me into an embrace. Just looked at me, really looked, as if we were alone in the room. As if the 200 people holding their breath didn't exist. Then he reached into his inner jacket pocket, not for a phone, not for a wallet, but for a single sheet of ivory stationery folded once, sealed with a wax impression. The Vesper monogram, V entwined with an M for Vesper manuscripts. He handed it to me. Only then did he turn to the room, his voice low but carrying, amplified by the sudden, absolute silence. Before we celebrate, there's something my great-aunt asked me to share. Aunt Lydia. My pulse didn't race, it settled, anchored. I took the paper. The wax seal cracked cleanly under my thumb, no hesitation, no theatrics, just the soft snap of tradition yielding to truth. Inside, the handwriting was Aunt Lydia. It was Mom's. Dated May 18, 2025, 3 days before she passed. The ink was slightly smudged in one corner, as if a tear had fallen, blurred, then dried. Her script, elegant, looping, the hand of a woman who wrote letters by hand long after email took over, filled the page. Maya, I know they'll call you quiet. They'll mistake your stillness for uncertainty, your listening for passivity. Don't let them. You were born to hold space, not ask for it, to anchor, not drift, to build, not just admire. Don't shrink to fit their frame. The world needs your depth. And if they laugh, let them. Laughter fades, truth remains. To Mom, my vision blurred, not with tears but with recognition. This wasn't just a letter, it was a testament. Written not in health but in the quiet clarity of her final days, when she knew the family narrative would try to absorb me, minimize me, repackage me. I looked up. The room was frozen. Evelyn's bouquet hung forgotten in her hand. James stared at the floor. My father's face was pale, his mouth slightly open. Uncle Richard's smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight, calculating stillness. The look of a man realizing the ground beneath him had just shifted. Daniel didn't wait for a reaction. He stepped to the podium, empty now, the cake knife still resting on its stand, and tapped the mic once. A soft thud that echoed like a gavel. Many of you know me as Daniel Vesper, CEO, investor, billionaire as the headlines say. A faint, wry lift at the corner of his mouth, but tonight I'm here as something far more important. He turned to me. As Maya's fiancé, as of last Thursday. A gasp, sharp, collective. And as the man who has watched, day after day, negotiation after negotiation, as she redefines what integrity looks like in a world that rewards speed over substance. He paused. Then gently, Maya. He stepped aside. The invitation wasn't just to speak. It was to testify. I walked to the podium, the ivory letter held in one hand, the clutch with its 2 certified envelopes in the other. My heels clicked against the hardwood, the only sound in the room. I placed Mom's letter on the stand, smoothed the edges and looked out. Not at Evelyn, not at Uncle Richard. At them, all of them. The cousins, the in-laws, the old friends, the new connections, the people who'd laughed, whispered, dismissed. My great-aunt Lydia once told me, I began, voice clear, calm, resonant, not loud but unavoidable, that in court, the first party to produce a certified document sets the frame of the entire proceeding. I opened my clutch, withdrew the first envelope, tore it open, not with anger but with ceremony, pulled out the 3-page certified copy of Amendment 3 to the Domestic Partnership Agreement, held it up just long enough for the front page to be visible. Vesper Daniel Ian Lynn Meyer filed, April 2, 2025, County Seal, certified true copy. This was filed with the Multnomah County Clerk on April 2nd. Then the second envelope. The affidavit. And this, sworn and notarized by Lydia W. Chen yesterday, confirms her intent to name me as executor of her estate, contingent on the public acknowledgement of my relationship with Daniel. I placed both documents beside Mom's letter. 3 truths, 3 timestamps, 3 irrefutable points in time. You saw me walk in alone tonight, I said, my voice softening, not in surrender but in finality, and you assumed I had nothing to offer but my presence. I looked at Evelyn, then at Uncle Richard. But presence isn't absence, and silence isn't surrender. I touched the top button of my jacket, click, fastening it once more though it hadn't come undone. Some of us don't arrive with fanfare, we arrive with receipts. And behind me the DJ, finally catching the cue, let the first notes of Ave Maria rise not as irony but as benediction. The room didn't erupt. It reverberated. Because the laughter was over. And the record. It had just been entered. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, dense with the weight of assumptions collapsing like the quiet after a lightning strike when the air still hums with residual electricity. I didn't move from the podium, didn't step back, didn't let the moment soften because accountability wasn't a feeling, it was a procedure, and procedures required documentation, distribution, and when necessary, formal notice. I reached into my clutch one last time and withdrew a slim stack of laminated cards, 8 by 5, ivory-coloured, edged in a thin band of gold foil, embossed with a single minimalist emblem, an open book overlaid with a key. The Vesper manuscript seal, elegant, unmistakable, not flashy, authoritative. There were exactly 32 of them, one for every adult in the immediate family and inner circle. I'd had them printed that afternoon, while Evelyn was approving the seating chart that moved me to row 6. A small act of quiet preparation, like packing an umbrella before the storm breaks. I began at the head table. Evelyn sat frozen, her fingers still curled around the bouquet, petals trembling slightly. I placed a card in front of her, gently, deliberately, then moved to James, to Uncle Richard, to Aunt Carol. Each placement silent, each card laid down with the same unhurried precision as a judge issuing a ruling. The laminated surface caught the light as I set one before my father. His eyes, wide, glistening, flicked from the card to my face. He didn't speak, just nodded once, slow and deep, like a man who'd just been handed a truth he'd been too afraid to ask for. By the time I reached the third row, the room had shifted again, not into chaos but into attention. People leaned forward, whispered not in mockery but in urgent, hushed consultation. What is that? Is that real? Look at the seal. I returned to the podium, the last card held in my hand. These are not invitations, I said, voice calm, steady, not cold but final like the closing of a ledger. They are notices. I held the card up, turned it slowly so all could see. The front bore only the Vesper seal and a single line in clean serif type. Official notice, confidential, for recipient eyes only. I flipped it over. The back was divided into 4 quadrants, each labelled with a discrete icon. Domestic Partnership Amendment 3. Filed, Multnomah County, April 2, 2025. Case number DP 202504222. Certified copy available. www.mcculloch.org/case/DP 2025-0422. Affidavit of Intent, CHEN Trust. Filed, Multnomah County, June 17, 2025. Case number TR20250685. Notarized MTORS OR7742. Vespa MANUSCIPTS Initiative, Lead Negotiator. University of Portland Press Release, March 12, 2025. QR code A small scannable square. Right arrow links to full announcement and bios. Legal notice. Per ORS 124.045, defamation requires falsity. All documents cited herein are certified public record. Dissemination for malicious intent may constitute tortious interference. Consult counsel before public commentary. A beat. Then quieter but no less firm. These are not threats, they are corrections. Uncle Richard stood, not abruptly, not angrily, but with the stiff, formal posture of a man who just realized he was no longer holding the pen. "This is a wedding, Maya," he said, voice tight, gesturing at the flowers, the cake, the guests. "Not a deposition, not a board meeting. Have some decency." The word hung there, decency, as if it belonged only to those who played by his rules. I didn't raise my voice, didn't even look at him directly. I just turned the card in my hands, letting the light catch the gold foil. "Decency," I said, "isn't performative, it's procedural." I met his gaze now, steady, unblinking. "It's honoring a woman's final wishes," a glance toward Mom's empty chair. "It's respecting a scholar's work," a nod to the university colleagues seated near the back. "It's acknowledging a relationship that was chosen, documented, and filed, while you were busy assuming it didn't exist." I paused. Then, the pivot, the formal notice, delivered not with venom, but with the quiet finality of a contract clause. Effective immediately, I am recusing myself from all family financial advising. A ripple, my uncle's face tightened. He'd relied on me for years, quietly, unofficially, to review trust distributions, vet investment advisors, even draft the annual letter to the family foundation board. I'd done it out of duty, out of love, out of the hope that one day they'd see me. "No more. Your accounts," I continued, "will be referred to my firm's compliance officer for independence review. Not because I distrust you, but because integrity requires distance when loyalty has been mistaken for obligation." I placed the final card on the podium. "You're welcome to consult with them directly. Their contact is on the reverse, all communications will be in writing, all recommendations in triplicate, all conflicts disclosed up front." I stepped back. The room didn't erupt, didn't collapse. It recalibrated. Evelyn finally set the bouquet down, carefully as if it might shatter. James reached for her hand. Aunt Carol picked up her card, turned it over and over in her fingers, her expression unreadable. And Uncle Richard. He didn't sit, didn't speak. He just stared at the card in front of him. The gold foil, the seal, the QR code, like a man reading his own obituary in a language he'd always assumed he understood. Because the most devastating accountability isn't screamed. It's served, laminated, stamped, filed, and in that moment the laughter wasn't just silenced. It was stricken from the record. Monday morning arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet hum of inevitability, the kind that settles after a storm has passed and the air is still too clean, too sharp to feel entirely normal. I sat at my desk in the university's rare books annex, sunlight streaming through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing above the oak surface. The space smelled of aged paper, cedar, and the faint, comforting bitterness of espresso from the machine down the hall. On my desk, a single manila folder, unstamped, unmarked, no university logo, no department heading. Just my name typed in clean courier font, Dr. Maya Lin. I opened it. Inside, a single sheet of ivory bond. At the top, the university seal, eagle, open book, Latin motto, Veritas Vincit, truth conquers. Beneath it, bold, black type. Resolution of the Board of TIUSDES. Unanimous consent, June 17, 2025. Whereas Dr. Maya Lin has demonstrated exemplary leadership, ethical rigor, and strategic vision in securing the Vespa Manuscripts Initiative. Whereas the terms of the initiative, including the binding ethics review panel, open access protocols, and curatorial independence, align precisely with the university's mission of scholarly integrity. Whereas Dr. Lin's appointment as lead negotiator has been publicly affirmed by Vespa Holdings, and her personal and professional credibility remain unimpeachable. Therefore be it resolved that the board hereby approves, in full, the establishment of the Lydia Chen Maya Lin Chair of Ethical Stewardship, with an initial endowment of $22 million, to be funded in 3 tranches over 24 months, per the executed Memorandum of Understanding dated June 14, 2025. Further resolved that Dr. Maya Lin shall serve as the inaugural chairholder, with all rights, responsibilities and privileges attendant thereto, effective July 1, 2025. Below 3 signatures, inked in deep blue, the Chancellor, the Chair of the Board, and Daniel Vespa ex officio as founding donor. Stamped in the lower right corner, certified true copy, Office of the Secretary of THE Board, June 17, 2025. Receipt 4. Not a promise, not a proposal. A resolution passed unanimously, backdated to the day of the wedding. They hadn't waited for fallout. They hadn't hedged. They had acted, while the champagne glasses were still being cleared, while the florist was packing up the peonies, while my family was still sitting in stunned silence at their hotel bar, trying to reconstruct the narrative. This wasn't just approval. It was vindication, codified. Because authority doesn't roar to be heard. It files. It stamps. It dates. It endorses. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the raised texture of the eagle's wings, the crisp indent of the lettering. This wasn't just a title. It was a platform, a permanent seat at the table, not because I'd demanded it, but because I'd designed it. The clauses, the safeguards, the ethical guardrails. The chair wouldn't just fund acquisitions, it would fund principles. Train a new generation of curators who understood that provenance wasn't just paperwork, it was justice. That repatriation wasn't generosity, it was restoration. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Lydia. The plaque design arrived. They used your wording, ethical stewardship where truth is the first acquisition. Well done, executor. Attached, a photo of the mock-up. Black marble, silver inlay, the names Lydia Chen and Maya Lin equal in size, equal in weight. Then another notification, an email, from the alumni magazine editor. Maya, stunning work this weekend. We'd love a photo for the fall issue feature. Power couples redefining legacy. Daniel's team says you'll wear the navy suit. Shall we schedule? I smiled, not triumphantly but peacefully. Because the real reversal wasn't the chair. It was the perception. The board hadn't just approved a position. They affirmed a framework, a way of operating in the world, quietly precise, fiercely documented, ethically anchored. And they'd tied my name to it, permanently. Later that afternoon, I walked to the university's main quad. The summer session hadn't begun, so the space was quiet, just a few students sprawled on the grass, reading, napping, laughing softly. I stopped beneath the old copper beech tree, the one where I'd sat as an undergrad, poring over Panofsky and dreaming of a life among manuscripts. I opened my jacket, just slightly, and touched the top button. Click. It was fastened, as it had been all weekend. As it would be from now on. Because the world had tried to unbutton me. And I had resewn every thread. With my own hands. With my own truth. With my own receipts. And now, finally, the record was sealed. Summer deepened. The cherry blossoms gave way to dogwoods, then to the heavy green canopy of maples lining the streets of Portland, their leaves broad and glistening after afternoon showers. Life didn't shatter after the wedding, it rearranged. Not with explosions, but with quiet recalibrations like tectonic plates settling into a new alignment, the tremors subsiding into a steadier, more honest ground. There was no banishment, no dramatic disownment whispered about in hushed, scandalized tones over brunch mimosas. The family didn't collapse, it contracted, like a lens adjusting focus, sharpening on what remained essential, letting the periphery blur. The group chat, once a relentless scroll of event invites, passive-aggressive reminders. And photo dumps from vacations I wasn't invited to, went silent for 3 days. Then, on the 4th morning, a single message appeared from Evelyn. Can we talk? Coffee, my treat, no agenda. No emojis, no exclamation points, just 8 words typed in the neutral sans serif of sincerity. We met at a small independent cafe downtown, the spilled ink tucked between a second-hand bookstore and a printmaking studio. No Sterlings, no parents, just two sisters seated at a corner table with mismatched chairs and mugs of dark roast. She arrived first wearing a simple linen dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup beyond tinted balm. She looked tired, not defeated. Weary. As if she'd spent the last 72 hours rereading a story she thought she knew by heart, and discovered whole chapters had been redacted. She didn't apologize, not yet, not directly. Instead, she pushed a folded document across the table, a proposal for her non-profit's new governance charter. "The board wants an outside ethics advisor," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Someone who understands fiduciary duty and mission alignment. I told them I knew just the person." She didn't say you, but she didn't have to. The subtext was clear: I see you now not as backup, as benchmark. A week later, an envelope arrived at my office, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, a thick cream-coloured card, not printed. Handwritten in fountain pen, the ink slightly faded at the edges, the script formal, precise, unmistakable. "Dr. Lin, your great-aunt's affidavit was impeccably drafted. As was your mother's letter, she always had a gift for distillation. I've reviewed ORS 124.045. You were correct. Truth requires no defense." "Well played. Richard Sterling." No signature flourish, no warmth, but in the legal world a handwritten note from a man like Richard Sterling wasn't courtesy. It was concession. A quiet, irrevocable acknowledgement that the record had spoken, and he, for once, had no rebuttal. Then came the deeper shift. At the quarterly Sterling Family Trust meeting, a gathering I'd quietly attended for years as Maya, Evelyn's sister, helps with their archives, my name was absent from the agenda. Not erased, promoted. The minutes, circulated afterward, listed. Motion to appoint independent compliance officer for trust oversight, carried. Referral accepted. Lin and Associates, Governance Division. They weren't asking me to help anymore. They were hiring me, at arm's length, with contracts, with scopes of work, with clear boundaries. Not as family, as expert. And that perhaps was the most profound consequence of all. They finally saw me not through the lens of kinship, but through the lens of credibility. No one was fired, no accounts were frozen. No public shamming occurred on social media. Evelyn's Instagram remained active, but the captions changed. Less blessed, more grateful for quiet strength. Less curated perfection, more candid moments. Her daughter finger-painting at the kitchen table, flower in her hair. James reading aloud, voice thick with emotion, to a room of foster kids at the non-profit summer program. They weren't villains. They were people, flawed, conditioned, operating within a system that rewarded visibility over depth, volume over precision. They'd mistaken my silence for absence, my steadiness for stagnation, my refusal to perform for weakness. And when the receipts surfaced, not as weapons but as testaments, they didn't double down. They reassessed. Because the real consequence of lawful, documented truth isn't punishment. It's perspective. It's the moment a man like Richard Sterling realizes the woman he dismissed as just the teacher holds certifications he can't unfile, affiliations he can't discredit, and a moral framework he can't outmaneuver. Not because she's louder, but because she's anchored. It's the moment a sister understands that love doesn't require shrinking, and that admiration can coexist with humility. It's the moment a family stops trying to fit you into their narrative, and starts making space for the story you were born to tell. The loose button. I kept it. Not in my pocket anymore. In a small glass case on my office shelf, next to the plaque mock-up and a pressed gardenia from that night. A reminder. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be filed. And once filed, they hold. Forever. The invitation arrived on heavy handmade paper, ivory textured with deckled edges and a single sprig of pressed lavender tucked into the fold. No calligraphy, no gold foil, just clean modern type. Maya, dinner 7 p.m. Aunt Lydia's, just us. No RSVP requested, no dress code specified, just a time, a place, and the quiet understanding that this wasn't a reconciliation, it was a reconstitution. I arrived at 6:55, the evening light soft and amber, spilling across Aunt Lydia's balcony where potted rosemary and thyme released their scent into the warm air. She answered the door in a deep indigo silk blouse, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, a rare informality. No cane tonight, just a steadying hand on the doorframe and in the other a wine key. "You're punctual," she said, stepping aside. "Good, precision begins with time." Inside, the table was set for four, fine bone china, linen napkins folded in simple rectangles, silverware polished to a soft gleam. At each place, a single white gardenia, stems wrapped in black velvet ribbon, just like the one Daniel had handed me that night. But tonight, no performance, just presence. My parents arrived moments later, Mom in a soft grey dress, Dad in a blazer he only wore for weddings and funerals. They hugged me, really hugged me, the kind that lingers, that says, "I see you, I've always seen you, I just didn't know how to say it," and then settled into their seats without a word. No small talk, no forced cheer, just the quiet comfort of shared history, finally unburdened by pretense. Aunt Lydia poured the wine, Oregon Pinot Noir, earthy and deep, and raised her glass. "To truth," she said, her voice quiet but resonant, "not the kind that shouts, the kind that holds." We clinked, the sound was soft, clear, final. Dinner was simple, miso-glazed salmon, jasmine rice, stir-fried greens with garlic and ginger, the kind of meal Mom used to make on Sundays when the world felt manageable. We ate slowly, talked less, but what was said carried weight. Mom reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "I read her letter," she said, voice low. "The one she wrote you, I didn't know, I wish I'd known sooner." "You knew enough to keep it safe," I replied. "That was its own kind of love." Dad cleared his throat, not awkwardly but deliberately, like he was preparing to testify. "I've been reviewing the trust documents you sent. The compliance framework is elegant, ruthlessly fair." A pause. "I'm proud of you, Maya, not just for what you've done, for how you've done it." Then Aunt Lydia set her fork down. "Now," she said, "the terms." Not a demand, a statement, like a judge opening a new docket. She didn't pull out a contract, didn't slide papers across the table. She simply looked at each of us in turn, Mom, Dad, me, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had spent a lifetime drafting language that lasted. "You love Maya, that has never been in question, but love without respect is suffocation, and loyalty without boundaries is exploitation." She took a sip of wine, set the glass down with deliberate care. "So here is the offer, not from me, from Maya, though I've reviewed it and it meets my standards for clarity and enforceability." She turned to me. I took a breath. Then, gently, firmly, "I love you, all of you, deeply, permanently." I let that settle, let it be true without condition. "But I will no longer be your advisor, your fixer, your emergency contact for every financial misstep, every interpersonal tangle, every just a quick question that turns into a 3-hour audit. No anger, no accusation, just fact. If you want me in your life, not as a resource but as a person, then meet me as I am." I laid out the conditions, not as walls but as doorways. Monthly dinners like this, no agendas, no crises, just connection. Texts before calls, calls before visits, respect for my time, my energy, my work. No unsolicited advice about my career, my relationship, my choices. Curiosity, yes, judgment, no. And if conflict arises, we address it directly, not through third parties, not at holiday gatherings, not in whispers. A pause. "This isn't punishment, it's preservation. I'm not withdrawing, I'm redefining proximity." Silence, not tense, contemplative. Then Mom, softly, "And if we get it wrong?" "We recalibrate," I said. "Grace isn't the absence of boundaries, it's what flows within them." Aunt Lydia nodded, satisfied. "Boundaries aren't walls," she murmured, echoing words I'd spoken only weeks before. "They're doors with locks you control." Later, as we lingered over tea, oolong fragrant, served in Mom's old porcelain cups, Evelyn texted. Not a call, not a voice note. A single image, her daughter, maybe 4, standing at a small easel in the backyard, brush in hand, tongue poking out in concentration. On the canvas, a swirl of blue and gold. At the bottom, in wobbly black marker, for Aunt Maya. No caption, no request. Just an offering. I typed back. "Tell her Aunt Maya has a studio, open by appointment." I hit send. And in that moment I understood. Grace with conditions wasn't about keeping people out. It was about making sure the door opened only for those willing to step inside. Respectfully. Intentionally. and ready to stay. 6 months later, autumn had settled into Portland like a well-worn coat, crisp mornings, golden afternoons, the air scented with wood smoke and damp earth. My new office wasn't in the admin wing. It wasn't even in the main humanities building. It was in the restored carriage house behind the rare books library, a single-story structure of brick and timber, its windows tall and generous, its floors wide plank oak, polished to a soft sheen. Sunlight poured in all day, shifting with the hours, painting the walls in stripes of honey and amber. This was the home of the Lydia Chen, Meyer Lin Chair of Ethical Stewardship. Not a title on a door, but a space, designed for collaboration, for contemplation, for the slow, sacred work of stewarding truth. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled not just with catalogues and conservation manuals, but with Aunt Lydia's personal collection. First editions of the Federalist Papers, annotated case law from the Warren Court, a leather-bound copy of the Analects with her marginalia in pencil, tiny and precise. On the far wall, a single-framed photograph, no grand portrait, no staged glamour shot, just a candid moment from the wedding, me mid-laugh, head tilted back, eyes closed, one hand raised to tuck a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Daniel stands slightly behind me, not touching, not posing, just watching, his expression unguarded, radiant with quiet pride. The photo had been taken seconds before he walked to the podium, before the receipts, before the record was entered. A snapshot of a woman who already knew, before the world did, who she was. I stood at my desk, fingers resting on the smooth wood, walnut, reclaimed from an old Oregon schoolhouse, adjusting the lapel of my blazer. Navy wool, unlined, the same cut as the one I'd worn that night, but today the top button was fastened, not out of necessity, out of ritual. Because today was the unveiling. Not of a building, not of a plaque, though that would come next week, mounted in the library's main hall, names equal, legacy intertwined. Today was smaller, more intimate. I opened the top drawer of my desk, the one with the soft close mechanism, the one I'd had custom fitted. Inside, nestled in a bed of black velvet, lay a small pouch, not silk, not satin. Linen. Hand-stitched, slightly worn at the seams, the kind of pouch a woman might carry in her pocket for decades, through wars and weddings and quiet acts of resistance. I undid the drawstring. Poured the contents into my palm. Buttons. Not costume jewelry, not souvenirs. Evidence. The loose mother-of-pearl button from the wedding dress, now resewn, its thread a shade darker, stronger. A small brass button from Daniel's charcoal suit, the one he'd worn that night, salvaged after the dry cleaner accidentally pulled it loose during pressing. He'd handed it to me the next morning, no words, just a look. Keep it, a relic of protocol upheld. A tiny ivory button, yellowed with age, from Grandma Chen's favourite silk jacket, the one she'd worn the day she taught me to thread a needle, her hands trembling slightly, her voice steady. One stitch at a time, Maya. Dignity is built, not given. And a final one, matte black ceramic, cool to the touch, from Aunt Lydia's blazer the night of the dinner. She pressed it into my hand as I left, for the next time the world tries to unfasten you. I selected the ivory one, Grandma. Held it in my palm, feeling its slight irregularity, the tiny chip on one edge where she dropped it once years ago and refused to replace it. Flaws remind us it's been used, she'd said, not discarded. Then with deliberate care I pinned it, not to my lapel, not to my collar, but to the inside of my blazer just over my heart. A hidden anchor, a private vow. I didn't do it for show. I did it for remembrance. Because the world would keep trying, subtly, persistently, to convince me that my worth needed amplification, that my voice needed volume, that my presence needed a +1 to be complete. But I knew better now. Some truths don't need shouting. They just need to hold. Like a button, resewn in the middle of a storm. Like a document, filed while the laughter still echoes. Like a love, chosen not for spectacle, but for substance. I smoothed my lapel, stepped out of the office, and walked down the hall toward the conservation lab, where a team of graduate students was preparing the Codex Sinaiticus fragments for digital imaging, their gloved hands moving with reverence, their voices hushed with awe. As I passed the tall windows, sunlight caught the black ceramic button pinned inside my jacket. Just a glint, hidden from the world known only to me. A tiny, unbreakable thing. Fastened. Secure. Ready, the city lights blinked on as dusk settled over Portland, soft golds and cool whites scattered across the hills like embers rekindled. I stood on my balcony, a mug of jasmine tea warming my hands, the steam curling into the cool air. Below, the street was quiet. No sirens, no urgency. Just the occasional hum of a passing car, the rustle of maple leaves in the breeze, the distant chime of the streetcar rounding the corner. Normal, peaceful, earned. I hadn't planned to post the video, not really. It had lived in my drafts for weeks, just the short clip from the hallway, the quiet question, have you ever been introduced as just something while holding the keys to the whole vault? I'd watched it dozens of times, edited the lighting, trimmed the silence, wondered if it was too raw, too revealing, too much. But tonight, 6 months to the day since the wedding, I pressed upload. Not for vindication, not for views. For resonance. Because the messages had started long before the video went live. Not from celebrities or influencers. From teachers in rural Ohio who'd been passed over for department chair because they were dynamic enough. From nurses in Texas who'd spent years advocating for patient safety protocols, only to be called difficult when they refused to stay silent. From archivists in Boston, librarians in New Mexico, curators in Detroit, women and some men who'd spent their lives holding space for truth, only to be told their quiet strength was lack of ambition. They'd found me through the alumni magazine piece, through a podcast interview I'd done on ethical stewardship, through the quiet ripple of a story that didn't need shouting to be heard. And their words, hundreds of them, kept returning to the same phrase. You made me feel seen. Not inspired, not motivated. Seen. Because quiet power isn't about waiting for the spotlight to find you. It's about being ready when the doors open and walking in like you belong, because you do. It's about knowing that dignity isn't performed, it's secured. One button, one receipt, one filed document at a time. I leaned against the railing, watching the lights shimmer on the Willamette. The video had been live for 12 minutes. Notifications were already piling up, not comments, not yet, but shares, from colleagues, from students, from a retired probate judge in Seattle who wrote, Aunt Lydia would have approved, precision is power. A soft chime from my phone. A new email. From University Press, Open Access Initiative. Dr. Lin, per your request, the Vesper Collection digital portal is now live. All 427 manuscripts fully accessible, searchable, downloadable. Attribution, digitized through the Lydia Chen, Maya Lin Chair of Ethical Stewardship. Thank you for modeling what stewardship looks like when it's rooted in truth, not control. I smiled. Because the victory wasn't the chair. Wasn't the plaque. Wasn't even the quiet recalibration of my family. It was this, a student in Nairobi at 3 a.m., clicking download PDF on a 12th century manuscript. No paywall, no institutional login, no gatekeeping. Just knowledge, freely given, freely received. That was the legacy. I lifted my mug, took a slow sip, hot, floral, perfect. Then softly, to no one but the night. If this resonated, hit subscribe. Not a plea, an invitation. Next week, I'll walk through exactly how to file a domestic partnership amendment in 48 hours, state by state, with template links in the description. Because access to power shouldn't depend on who you know. It should depend on what you document. I paused, looked out at the city, alive, complex, still imperfect, and whispered the truth I'd spent a lifetime learning. And remember, the world may mock your silence, may mistake your stillness for surrender, may laugh when you walk in alone. A breath, but dignity. I touched the black ceramic button, hidden beneath my sweater, pressed just over my heart. That's the button no one can unfasten for you. Below, a street lamp flickered once, then steadied. Holding its light. Just like me.